What happens when you put several ant colonies together? Will they engage in war? Or will they join forces? In ant keeping, it's a golden rule to never mix your ant colonies together, even if they are the same species, because most ant colonies will fight. And it's cruel. You see, each ant colony carries its own distinct colony scent, like an ID badge. And if two teams of ants with different colony scents happen to come together, by way of overlapping territory for example, it would lead to a lethal ant war. However, there are some cases where this golden rule does not apply. This week, I tried my luck and put together 7 young ant colonies of mine that I've been raising over the past 67 days, together in a single living space, to see what they do. Did the ants go to war? Or did they do what I had hoped they would and join forces to form one huge super colony? The result was just jaw-dropping, and something I totally didn't expect to happen at all. Welcome to the AntsCanada Ant Channel. Please subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon. Welcome to the AC family. Enjoy. AC family, okay. Before any of you start freaking out and bashing me for ant cruelty, I have a few things to explain as to why I figured the odds of such an experiment were in my favor. Do keep on watching until the end though, as I have an important question to ask all of you, and will be needing your opinions on something very important. Now before I go over my reasons for performing such a controversial experiment, and then proceed to attempt the mixing of 7 ant colonies together, let's do a quick recap for those who are new and are just joining us. These are our 8 young carpenter ant colonies, each colony exactly 67 days old. Within each test tube is a queen, her first generation of worker ants, known as nanitics, and brood. I captured each queen 67 days ago during their annual mating nuptial flight, placed them into test tubes to simulate the claustral chamber which the queens would have created in the wild, and each queen spent 67 days laying eggs and eventually raising them to adult nanitics. Now the initial plan when I first started this journey was to simply capture as many queens as I could. I caught 14 in total, and see how many of them would go on to found successful ant colonies. I knew that in nature, not all queen ants successfully make it to the colony founding stage. And in fact, at the start, I wasn't sure if any of my 14 queens captured would successfully found an ant colony. 6 of the queens ended up non-successful at even making it to the egg-laying stage. Some died of natural causes like mold, mites, and even parasitic maggots. But then, as the remaining 8 queens started proving their colony founding prowess, I began to realize that, okay, I won't be able to keep all these ant colonies. And in my mind, I figured I'd have to release some, or all but one of the colonies back into the wild. It was sad to think, as over the past 2+ months, I'd really grown attached to each of the ant colonies under our care. But then, after thinking about it this week, an awesome idea came to me that was pretty crazy, but just might actually work. AC family, listen to this. So here's why I thought this experiment was a pretty good idea. So quick ant biology lesson, most ant species have colonies that are called monogynous, which means the ant colonies contain only one egg-laying queen, who lays all the eggs and is the mother of the entire colony. Like fire ants, where there is a single queen ant and her millions of workers and babies. That's just how fire ants operate, and non-negotiably. There is definitely no way a fire ant colony will adopt or accept a second egg-laying queen ant in the colony. Furthermore, only related colony members are allowed in the nest, so fire ant workers from another colony are not allowed to join forces. 2 fire ant colonies coming together, as we've seen in a past video, will engage in a bloody war. There are, however, also ant species which are considered polygynous, meaning they do tolerate multiple queens in a colony, like in weaver ants, where there could be dozens, even hundreds of queens, all laying eggs in a single ant colony. The workers just take care and serve all queens. Our yellow crazy ant colony, the Golden Empire, is another example where there are lots of queen ants in the colony. And they are so polygynous that even if two unrelated yellow crazy ant colonies are placed together, they kind of go into a quick wrestling match, but then decide to join forces, accepting all new queens and blending harmoniously to form a super colony, which we've seen happen a couple times on this channel already with our Golden Empire. And so going back to our carpenter ants, there are actually carpenter ant species which are polygynous. In terms of the carpenter ant species we are keeping, I don't have an exact species ID on them yet, but there are carpenter ant species in my country that are known to be polygynous. In fact, we've kept them before on the channel, if you recall the lumberjacks. Now, if you remember the first video, the nuptial flight of these ants kind of occurred inside my room, a cottage I'm currently staying at in the middle of a mountain rainforest. And over time, I have been spotting evidence around my place of the main carpenter ant colony, from which our queens and/or the males that mated with them most likely came from. In the mornings, I would always find bits of sawdust in certain places, discarded as a result of the ants' tunneling activities in the wooden structures of my place. And at night, I spotted carpenter ants forming active foraging trails around my kitchen. These carpenter ants, which were definitely the same species as ours, were a pest species and well adapted to living in domestic spaces. I then began to wonder if the mating nuptial flights of this species of carpenter ant can happen indoors. And assuming an ant colony sends out hundreds of these queen ants, and knowing the success rate that we've seen from a 14 queen sample is about 57% that a queen will successfully mate and go on to found an ant colony, then the chances of 2 or more carpenter ant colonies coming together naturally and overlapping in real estate is pretty high, I'd say. Now, I've never seen a carpenter ant war in my place so far, and so my hunch was that a handful of mated queen ants of this species of carpenter ant end up founding ant colonies somewhere in the walls and form one massive ant colony. I mean, think about it. Where else could the queen ants go to found their ant colonies and not expect to run into a bunch of its sister queens' colonies if they were limited to just this cottage? My guess was that they simply all blend together and form a super colony. Now, if my hunch was correct, and these ants of ours were truly a polygynous species whose colonies can combine together to form super colonies, then I could actually end up keeping all the ant colonies and not have to release them. I could just combine them into one huge colony. That would be totally awesome. And the dream of having a polygynous carpenter ant colony with all these egg-laying queens laying tons of eggs made my ant-loving mouth water. Imagine the massive ant setup we could build with wood and glass. Anyway, a third possibility is that the ants from the different colonies simply tolerate each other being around, but don't actually mix. In this case, the ants would choose coexistence, which would also be quite cool, but I don't know how long I'd be able to keep the colonies together in one setup as they grew if that was the case. So, was it risky putting the ants together? Yes, but for me, AC family, the odds were in our favor, and it was worth testing out in a controlled way. For science. What do you guys think will happen? Will the ants go to war with each other? Or will they choose peace and join forces? Or will they ignore each other and accept coexistence for now? Leave your guesses in the comments, and afterward, go back to your comment and let us know if you were right. And so, AC family, here was my ultimate plan for the Great Carpenter Ant introduction. You guys will love this. AC family, behold, the Campanosium. It's the great arena within which the ant colonies will have the space to wander and explore, and eventually meet in a highly regulated and controlled manner where I could observe how they interact and separate the ant colonies if needed. There are 8 holes leading into the arena with rubber ports, which perfectly fit the test tubes in which the colonies are currently living. I made sure to keep minimal with the design of the arena for now, so I could have full view of the ants and not have the decor create areas where the ants could be out of view. We can always decorate this space more intricately later. The top lip of the Campanosium had been painted with a layer of baby powder and rubbing alcohol to act as a barrier so the ants don't escape into my room. So my plan was to first connect 2 ant colonies to the Campanosium and observe how they interact, before going ahead and adding the other ant colonies. I would not proceed to add the other ant colonies if I noticed they were showing signs of over-aggression or going to war with each other. Now there are 2 things you should know about this before we proceed with this experiment in the Campanosium. First, if you've been following our previous videos, you will know that I suspect that our 7th ant colony, which today is one of the biggest colonies of the group, with a total of 12 nanitics now, might actually be a different species of carpenter ant from the rest. How weird. The queen is looking right at us. She's just making sure we're friends. But as you can tell, this queen is slightly more red at the head and thorax than the others. Plus she produces brood with naked pupae, which is unique because the other 7 queens produce young that develop into cocooned pupae. Therefore, I have decided not to add colony number 7 to this mixing experiment, as they probably war with the other ants. I'll just hold on to them for now, and we can all decide later whether or not we want to keep them. But man, look at those repletes, will ya? The workers who have volunteered to be the living food stores of the colony, carrying food stored in bulk in their social stomachs for gradual distribution. Love this colony. Alright, now the second thing I needed to point out was that, as you may know, queen number 5 is still raising her brood. As you can see, she's behind the others and just has cocoons. And because of this tardiness, we suspected that she may not have mated during nuptial flight. You see, as mentioned in a previous video, due to ant genetics, unmated queens can still lay eggs, but they only become male ants, which would suck because male ants have no purpose in the ant world, except wait around to mate, which also means in the normal circumstance, if these huge cocoons, which do look like male ant cocoons, do actually hatch into males, the queen is as good as dead, because the males wouldn't be able to take care of her. The other possibility is that she's been eating some of her eggs over time, so she could invest in fewer, larger workers, as her first batch of nanitics. We're still waiting for one of those cocoons to hatch to be able to know for sure. It should be soon because I see eyes darkening, which means hatch day is close. If males do end up hatching from those cocoons, it was sad to think that queen number 5 and all her useless male babies would have to be released into the wild to die. However, if my hunch was correct, and these carpenter ants do band together to form polygynous ant colonies, it would be a complete saving grace for queen number 5 and her sons, because then I could simply introduce them to the other ants, and she would then have proper workers from the other colonies to take care of her and her sons. Sure, queen number 5 wouldn't be able to produce regular worker ants and would just be dead weight for the colony, eating up valuable food and taking up resources, but at least she would live and at least contribute to the colony's male ant population for the next nuptial flight. Having number 5 in the mix also would be a great way to tell if the workers are actually all mixing up and not just sticking to their biological birth colonies. Because if queen number 5 and all her males remain alive, then it means workers from the other colonies are definitely feeding her and her sons. And so this was the plan. Connect 7 of our 8 ant colonies to the Campanosium. But before we go ahead and make the introduction, there was one more thing I needed to do. Food. I placed in a cup of sweet jelly, so the ants had something to do while in the Campanosium. And what better way to bond with new friends than over dinner? Or actually, in the case of these ants, which are nocturnal, breakfast. Also, in terms of the 8th hole, I'm blocking it off with cotton for now, as I can use this opening as a port to connect to other setups in the future. Okay, AC family, here goes nothing. Are you ready? Let's do this! I took colony number 1. Wow! I've always had a special love for colony number 1, probably because it was also one of the largest colonies of the bunch, also with 12 worker ants now. But guys, have a look at how big the queen is! Last week, before we gave the colony their first meal ever, the queen was a bit skinny, right? But it seems, AC family, after we fed them, It triggered her body to make that biological switch over to full egg production mode, and her gaster was now swollen with upcoming eggs, a condition known as physogastry. I love when queens get physogastric and all fat like a balloon. It's a good sign many more eggs are about to come. I know a lot of you guys are fans of this colony as well. I took the colony and attached it to the campanosium. Once attached, I now needed to release the ants. However, I didn't want to just rip away the huge cotton blocker because the claustral cell still needs to remain as still and wind-free as possible. So to create the new opening tunnel into the outside world, I have this. A small piece of tubing. I could just fixate it to some cotton, and it could act as a small door for the ants. I placed the tubing door and cotton into the test tube. I held my breath as I watched the first worker ant emerge into the outside world for the first time in its entire life. This was such a special event to witness. Prior to this moment, the ant had only known the test tube claustral cell in which it was born. But nothing was more amazing to this ant than what it was seeing and smelling right now as it stepped onto the campanosium grounds to explore. A second ant came to smell the fresh outside air. The curious brave worker began to wander around. It was at this time that I realized, oh yeah, it's time to add the other doors and block the ends of the tubes with cotton so the ants don't escape. It would also make connecting to the other test tubes much easier when ready. Eventually, the first exploratory ant discovered our sweet jelly and began to feast. The ant filled up its social stomach to the max, and once fat like a water balloon, full of sweet jelly, it began to embark on its way back to the colony. It was at this time that I decided it was now time to add colony number 2. Also an active and very promising ant colony, colony number 2 seemed like they were eager to break free ASAP. Attached. AC family, let's watch. To my surprise, the ants of colony 2 were not as eager to emerge. They waved their antennae outside the door to smell, but didn't come out. But then something happened that made my heart stop. The full ant of colony 1 was heading straight for the opening of colony 2. Ah! 2 pairs of antennae touched, but the full ant thought twice about entering that hole and headed towards the correct nest opening of its birth colony. Whoa! Okay, so no aggression so far. That was a good sign. Inside colony number 1, the brave exploratory worker told its entire colony of the awesome food it found just outside the nest and began to regurgitate it up to have the rest of the colony have a taste. This nanitic had done the colony proud. They would be sending out more scouts soon. But as for colony number 2, still no emergence. Just antennae poking out. Perhaps they weren't ready? Colony number 1 sent out its second scout. It crawled bravely across the barren rocky surface of the campanosium. Following the pheromonal trail, the last scout left on its way back home, all the way to the goods. Bingo! It stopped to fill up. And also made its way back home. Like the first scout before it, it began to regurgitate the contents of its social stomach to its fellow colony members, and then to its beloved queen. But looking at colony number 2, there still seemed to be no interest in emerging into the campanosium, just a worker at the door, waving its antennae out. This was a little disappointing, but I surely didn't want to rush them. Colony number 1 had now sent out its third scout to collect food. It was at this time that I made a very split decision. I don't know why, Perhaps I was just too eager to see how the ants would interact upon meeting, and considering the fact that colony number 2 wasn't ready for an introduction yet, I made the executive decision to proceed to add colony 3 to the mix. Like colony 2, it seemed colony 3 was not yet willing to emerge. The third scout of colony number 1 made its way back to the colony with a full gaster. Man, colony 1 was just doing so well at this. Great work, colony 1. The queen feasted happily. A worker from colony 3 kind of emerged but seemed a bit shy still. Colony 2 still waving those antennae from inside, and colony 1 sending out their fourth scout now, who crawled across the rocks over to the sweet jelly. Finally, I spotted a worker from colony 3 getting more brave as it wandered outside the hole. Fourth scout of colony 1 was now full and making its way back home. The workers of colony 1 were just killing it. They sent out a fifth scout, which wandered around the campanosium, and at one point I thought it was going to come in contact with one of the other colonies, but nope, it was more interested in eating. As the fifth scout from colony 1 began to head back home, and I saw that there was still no hope for colony 2 nor 3 to emerge, I again made the sudden split executive decision to go ahead and add the fourth colony to the mix. Yes, I was crazy, I know. I just really badly wanted the ants of the different colonies to interact. But of course, these were ants, and they can't always do what we want them to, right? When attached, a worker emerged from the hole cautiously, with other workers behind it. It wandered around a bit, but then re-entered the nest, not willing to risk wandering further. No! That's it! I attached the fifth colony, which of course had no workers yet, and the sixth colony. One of these ant colonies should be ready to come out, but every time I made the attachment, the ants would just kind of peek out and not come outside to forage. I decided to go all the way and attach the final colony, colony 8, to the mix. This is when things took a very scary turn, and when I began to realize that my impatience might have been a huge mistake. While I was busy connecting the other colonies, I hadn't noticed that a scout was finishing off its meal. I had assumed it was colony number 1's sixth scout. That was until it began to head towards the opening of colony 3. Oh? Wait a sec. Was this a worker from colony 3 that finally decided to emerge without me noticing? Yay! Finally, colony 3 was sending out its scouts. Perhaps now 2 workers from different colonies would meet up. But AC family, I was not prepared to see what I saw next. A meetup of ant strangers was exactly what happened. I expected the full scout to come rushing into the test tube like usual. But instead, I saw this. Look whom I found entering our premises, ladies. We've got a trespasser in our midst. A worker had the scout who was encumbered and full of jelly by the antenna. This was not a scout from colony 3. It was the sixth scout of colony 1 that had wandered into the wrong hole. Oh no! I tried not to panic. They weren't spraying formic acid yet, and there was a possibility this was the wrestling ritual prior to the process of ant colonies eventually joining forces. My heart stopped as I watched to see what the ants would do next. A second ant came around to smell the newcomer. She seemed quite interested in her full gaster. Oh, I hope they weren't going to kill her. A third ant came to inspect the strange ant with a different colony scent that had been dragged in. Again, the full gaster was of great interest. A fourth ant came to smell her out too. The full ant tried to remain calm in the face of this very tense moment and tried to sneak away, but it was no use. This worker was not about to let go so easily. Why leave so soon? The worker sneered at the trespasser. Our queen would like to see you now. Instantly, the scout tried to burst away and make a run for it, but the sudden struggle caused a blob of jelly to come bursting out of its mouth from its full turgid crop. The other ants seized the opportunity and drank from this blob like desperate hyenas, hoping for an easy meal. Let me go, the ant pleaded. It was then that the giant queen approached to inspect her minions' latest catch. "Now, who do we have here?" the queen inquired as she waved her antennae cautiously to smell. Workers continued to drink from the blobs of jelly barfed up as a result of the ants' complete fear. It was at this exact moment that I completely regretted this entire experiment. But one thing I did notice was that they still weren't completely killing this ant trespasser. There was no formic acid spray, no tearing of limbs, no panic, just antenna cuffs and inspection. The full ant seemed paralyzed with fear and almost surrendered to her fate at the hands of these foreign ants. But then, suddenly, the ant who had been holding the ant hostage the whole time got hungry. She was envious of the ants that were able to have a taste of the sweet jelly. So she released her mandible grip and attempted to get the hostage to barf up more jelly. "Give me some of that." That was enough for the ant to then spring into action and escape. It leaped up to its feet and ran out the door. It almost went into the hole of Colony 2. But nope, it wasn't going to make the same mistake twice. It quickly cleaned its antennae so it could smell better and headed towards its home scent. It ran back to the correct opening of its true colony, Colony 1, and rushed through the door as fast as it could. OMG guys, you won't believe what just happened to me. Boy, was she glad to be back home and safe. She proceeded to regurgitate the contents of her jelly collection to her beloved colony members. I stayed up to monitor the colonies over the next few hours, but none of the colonies had sent out scouts. Only Colony 1 seemed willing to send out scouts, and there were times they'd come across the other holes but would never decide to enter, nor would there be any signs of aggression from home court. This experiment did not turn out the way I expected. But AC family, now that you've seen exactly what happened, here's where I need your help. The foreign worker ant was dragged into the nest. The ant wasn't killed nor sprayed with formic acid. It was met with semi-aggression, and the ants even tried to feed from it. So my question for you is, what should we do? Should we keep them together and observe what happens, or should we have stuck to the golden rule of ant keeping of not mixing them? And should I separate them now before this escalates and we actually lose ant lives? AC family, please vote under the pinned comment of this video by hitting thumbs up on either the post "Keep them together" or "Separate them now." I've been monitoring them non-stop, but I'm actually unsure what to do here, as the results aren't very conclusive yet. Is this just the equivalent of the typical wrestling that happens prior to colonies joining forces? Or is this truly a sign that these ants will not tolerate outsider ants and will never mix to form a polygynous colony? Let me know in the comment section what you think the best course of action is, and if the majority of you suggest I separate them just to be on the safe side, I'll do that ASAP. If not, I'll keep them together and see how things go, in hopes that we can pursue establishing a polygynous carpenter ant colony. The fate of these carpenter ants lies in your hands. I hope we make the right choice. Together, I believe we will. It's ant love forever.